Hello and welcome to Media7. I'm Russell Brown. It's a special show tonight, our 150th. Better yet, this week, Media7 was voted Best Digital-Only Show and Best Show on the Freeview channel in the 2011 Freeview Awards. Good news! And the bad news? Last week, the Minister of Broadcasting announced that our channel, TVNZ7, the one you're watching, will not have its funding renewed next year. You can't have everything, including a broadcast frequency. Telecommunications has been a crucial, if frequently impenetrable, policy area for the past 2 decades. Labor spent years overhauling the sector, and National made a huge national broadband network a key election promise. The shape of the government's plan for UFB, Ultra Fast Broadband, has become evident in recent weeks, and the reception has not been what Minister Stephen Joyce would have wanted. 11 organisations, including Federated Farmers, the Telecommunications Users Association, and every telco bar telecom, this week wrote to MPs voicing concern about the bill to deliver UFB. There's even another full-page swipe at the bill from Telstra Clear in yesterday's newspapers. We'll find out why in a moment, but first Sarah Daniel looks at the unusual lobbying that has characterised the project so far.
What is UFB? Why, it's unidentifiable flying bullshit.
Do you want to do a big cap joint on the sides, or do you want to have a pillow with a Tyco wraps on it?
119 and 123 microfarads. Yeah, no, she's out. Yeah.
Good luck if you were looking for an answer from the chorus line.
How many jobs you done this month, huh?
Too many.
OK, so let's look at this one then. What's with the string? Is it some kind of trap? A giant spider web? Why don't they just call a plumber? This little guy seems to know what he's doing.
Telstra Clear Broadband. Your move.
My move? Righto. What am I supposed to be doing exactly? Who are these people talking to, and what exactly are they trying to say? And is anyone the wiser about any of this?
I'm joined now by the Chief Executive of 2ANZ, the Telecommunications Users Association, Paul Brislin, and New Zealand Herald writer Chris Barton. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Now, Paul, as Sarah pointed out, we didn't learn a lot from those ads. Can we start with how we got here? Broadband promise made, government elected in 2008, then what?
Yep. So National was elected. One of the few promises they made was we'll deliver an ultra-fast broadband network to the nation. It'll be based on fibre optic cable. You'll be able to connect to this at blisteringly fast speeds, and we will see economic development, economic boon, the likes of which the country has seldom seen. What we're getting is a slightly watered-down version of that. So the idea of everybody being connected has become 75% of the population will be connected. These are basically everybody in the cities and towns. If you're rural, there's a whole other project for you. There's the RBI, the Rural Broadband Initiative, which has much lower speeds and quite a different mechanism. So that's a bit of a problem. We're creating a 2-tier environment. If you live in the city, though, you should be able to get access to the fibre eventually.
And it will be brought to us by Crown Fibre Holdings, government agency, which will go into public-private partnerships with local fibre companies, most of whom, from what I can tell, seem to be telecom.
Telecom, yes, they are in the box seat. They have won most of the regional bids to a certain level anyway. They're not there yet. They've got to sign the paper, but they are absolutely the preferred bidder for most of the country. Telecom has said we must win Auckland if we're to do the rest of the country, purely on an economic footing. But there are certain pockets around the country, Northland, some of the Waikato, a little bit down south, that have gone to lines companies, electricity lines companies. And
you and 10 other organisations have waved the protest flag this week. It's relatively unusual to see the users on the same side as the telecommunications companies.
That's right.
What's your grievance?
Well, our problem is not so much with the goal. We absolutely agree. You know, an ultra-fast broadband network would be fantastic. I think there's great upside to that, economically, socially. There is a lot of goodwill in there. The problem is partly the way the government's doing it, which is basically by diktat. This is the way we're going to do it, and that's the end of it. They've introduced a few clauses into a new telecommunications bill, which give us real cause for alarm. The most important one being the idea of a regulatory holiday for whoever wins this. That is, the Commerce Commission cannot look at your business in terms of the price and non-price terms, which covers quite a large area, for the rest of the decade until 2020.
And what Stephen Joyce has effectively said about this is that it was a pragmatic move.
Yep.
We were afraid we weren't going to be able to get anyone to invest in this, the private side of the PPP.
That's right.
Unless we said, look, the Commerce Commission will leave you alone for 10 years.
That's right.
And
the reason is they're putting up $1.5 billion of public money, our money, but the project overall is probably going to cost about $6 billion. So to get the rest of the cash, they said, OK, who'd like the $1.5 billion? They had no interest at all. It wasn't until they sweetened the pot with this, this regulatory holiday that suddenly Telecom and Vector in particular came out of the woodwork and said, OK, now we're interested.
Chris Bartlett, you've been covering this for, what, 20 years, this beat?
Something like that, yeah.
How far have we come?
Well, it's difficult to say, really, because in a way this whole thing goes back to when the government of the time sold Telecom, and we ended up with a whole telecommunications service provided by a private company instead of it as a public utility company provided by the government. And ever since then, there's been problem after problem after problem. And because Telecom is effectively a monopoly provider, it doesn't really have any incentive to make the network better. And so my kind of view is that we've ended up with a kind of telecommunications service that's really substandard in New Zealand and has been for a long time.
And the pitch was, actually, as I recall, during the election campaign, was that this was going to fix that, and to the extent of the tax, you know, the government competing with taxpayers' money against Telecom, network competition.
The election promise from both parties at the time was, yes, we're going to do something about this. And so in a way that was an admission of defeat, you know, like they clearly saw that no one was going to build New Zealand a fast fibre network. It wasn't going to happen without the government stepping in. So here was a prime example of the thing just failing. And so when they put forward these ideas, I think there was, without a doubt, the national plan was the bolder plan. They just said, we are going to step in, we're going to put up 1.5 billion, and we're going to build a fibre optic network, ultra fast, to 75% of the country. It still leaves 25% of the country that's a bit of a problem, but on the whole, I thought that was a bold step, and I thought that was great.
Whereas the Conservative approach would have been to build bits, but most of us would still be using the copper wire that we do for broadband at the moment.
Yeah.
Is this another government fait accompli, Paul? Because I mean, I know you've had a problem with your access to the select committee and all the other companies. You got 10 minutes of oral submission, which is unusual.
It's quite unheralded. We first of all had a problem with the amount of time given to make a submission, a written submission. Instead of the usual months of notice, we were given a supplementary order paper to go with the bill of 77 pages of dense legal text and given a week to prepare a submission. So we complained and said, look, this is not on. We got given an extension, which was great. But when we got to the select committee, instead of being able to argue the point and discuss it at length, we were all given 10-minute slots. Now, we managed to eke them out to a bit longer, but it meant some people fell off the end and didn't get heard at all. And the democratic process itself has been somewhat undermined by all of this, by a minister, I think, who has said, he's approaching it from a very pragmatic point of view. I'm a businessman, this is how we do things, I'm the CEO, I've made the decision, now we're getting on. What he hasn't done is engaged with the industry, engaged with the consumers, the people who are paying for it, who are going to use it at the end of the day, to say, what is it you want? How are we going to build this? What's the best way to do it? We don't want to build over the top of somebody else's network, so how can we work together to everybody's benefit? Instead, it's been, right, let's get on, we've got an election promise, there's a new election coming up. By November, I want a picture of the Prime Minister with a silver shovel turning the first sod and putting in the fibre optic cable.
How much has this always been about what to do about Telecom?
That's a very good question as well, because that's a different matter. To get this done, Telecom has to split its business in half. It has to say, we're going to have a network company and a retail company, and the two will be completely separately owned. And I think that's been driving a lot of this. It's never been publicly said that that's why they're here, but it's certainly the driving force. They want telecom to stop being what they call a vertically integrated monopoly. It's the retail provider, it's the wholesale provider, and it's the operational network provider. Instead, what we're going to get is Chorus 2, which is the network arm, and telecom retail, which will be a smaller retail-focused business. And the two won't be related. That's the plan anyway, whether it comes together.
So this was a means of forcing telecom to separate.
That's right, and telecom has agreed. If it wins this contract, it will split in half. We'll have two different players.
Chris, what would you have done with telecom? Because you've been a fairly trenchant critic of them over the years.
Yeah, I have, just because I would have thought it would make sense for a public utility company, even if it is in private ownership, to be constantly upgrading its network and moving towards a situation where the network becomes a fibre network. And really, I think a lot of people don't understand the difference between a fibre network and a copper hybrid network, which is what we have. With a fibre network, it's like putting communications into a kind of warp drive. We get unimagined bandwidth, and we get a modern communication system that really, for a country like New Zealand, if we're ever going to compete, it's the kind of thing we really need. And this was always the idea of the Ultra Fast Broadband network, was it's the possibility that it could transform the economy in what it would enable, communications anywhere in the world in the blink of an eye.
Now, the Commerce Commission will be restrained once the bill is passed. In advance of that, it's decided that it wants to have a look at so-called demand-side issues, which include things like international capacity and cost and data caps, but also content arrangements. And I wonder whether this is something that really deserves more attention, because what they're going to be looking at specifically is who's going to control the content. If you look at the kind of deal that Telstra Clear has with Sky to supply Sky channels, Sky is going to control the content. Will the Commerce Commission look closely at that?
Oh, I think they will. They began an investigation into Sky's dominance in the pay TV market. The incoming national government said we're not having a bar of that and cut that off. This is another way of looking at it, and it's quite right that they do, because these are all bits of information on the network. Some people call it an ISP, some people call it a broadcaster. It's the same stuff, and to have two entirely separate rules for the same stuff is a bit silly. So what they're going to do is have a look at that as an issue, potentially say, okay, well, Sky and all broadcasting falls under the same remit as telecommunications, and that's how we're going to govern it going forward. The problem there is Sky's very good at lobbying. They're very, very keen to make sure that nobody thinks they're a monopoly, and they've been very careful, very cautious not to be too outrageous and so bring down the wrath of the government on them. So it'll be a very interesting tussle to see just where they get to. And
just finally, quick answer to the question the consumer out there will have is, this is going to be faster, right? Will it be cheaper?
No. For the next 10 years, for the first 6 years anyway, we're on copper, so we're on the same system. That potentially could get more expensive. In the long term, you're on fibre. They're fixing the prices for the next 10 years today, and I don't see how you can predict that far ahead in terms of telecommunications services. If you think back 10 years ago, there was no Google, there was no Facebook, there was no Twitter. I don't know what I'll be doing 10 years from now. I don't see how you can price accordingly.
Paul Brizzle and Chris Barton, thank you very much for your time. Coming up soon, 2 generations of Murdochs and an exclusive with the folks who brought Auto-Tune to the news.